Okay, so we're here with Mark Goodman, principal at Goodman Commercial and co-publisher of the Goodman Report. How you doing, Mark?
I'm very good, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark, for taking the time. In a weird turn of events, we're doing a weekend interview.
Yeah,
Uh, so thanks for eating up some of your Sunday.
that's okay. I don't have much going on Sundays.
If we make any references to geographical points, fortunately, we have a lot of maps in our collective
Trying to
background.
think of where how that map relates to your map.
This is Metro Vancouver. We've got some cool wallpaper we put up in our office. So I'm thinking of putting a pin on every time I do a sale. We could put the pin up there.
Right on.
So Mark, can you maybe start to, a lot of our listeners are going to be familiar with you and definitely the Goodman Report, but can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I've been in this crazy business for 18 years. I was born and raised in Vancouver. I went to UBC. I received a degree in psychology at UBC in 2000. And then after UBC, I worked on Howe Street for a short period of time, selling stock for an investor relations company. Then I tried my luck at software sales. I sold software for dispatchers for taxi cab companies. And then I landed a great job at the Jim Pattison Trade Group, which was an export company, and we bartered amongst companies within the Jim Pattison Group. And then in 2002, I joined my father, David Goodman, and we've been focusing on rental apartment building sales, multifamily investments, and development sites ever since. And Cynthia Jagger joined us just over 4 years ago. Director, she was formerly director of Altus Group, which is a national appraising firm, and her focus was multifamily and development sites, and is now a full partner and publisher of the Goodman Report, my partner. And we had to make her partner right away. She's one of the most talented real estate practitioners in the industry, and her brain is like a supercomputer. So you don't want to compete against her. So we're very fortunate to have her at Goodman Commercial. And we now have 15,000 subscribers to the Goodman Report. We had nearly 30,000 connections on LinkedIn. And we do a lot of business. 2019 was a big year for us. We did over $400 million in sales. I think we were the number one commercial real estate team in that year. So yeah, it's been a good ride.
That's incredible. A few things, Mark. One is, did you ever meet Jim Pattison when you worked?
You know, it's funny. I never met the man. He's quite the legend. I was never
fortunate. You're never on the bottom of the sales team, where doesn't he clip the couple of people that are not performing very well?
Oh yeah, I mean that was his business model back then, ruled with fear. But no, I've never met him, and I think he's still active. I think he's in his early 90s and still goes to work. An amazing guy. In fact, I'm still in touch with some of my colleagues there over 20 years later.
What exactly did you do at the Jim Pattison Group, and how did that kind of shape, or was that a catalyst to get into real estate?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I didn't really know what direction I wanted to go after university. I knew I wanted to do something to do with marketing and sales and business. And I was fortunate to land a job with a small company within a very large organization called the Jim Pattison Trade Group. And my role at the beginning, and it evolved over time, but my job was to barter goods and services amongst the companies. So for example, I would be provided with a credit of Jim Pattison outdoor advertising media, and I would trade that for other goods and services with another company within Jim Pattison Trade Group, and we take a little bit off the top as profit. And then things evolved. I started getting creative, and for example, I cut a deal with Sony Canada. We provided Sony $1 million worth of advertising, whether it was the radio or the outdoor signage. In return, we got $1 million wholesale worth of electronics, which I would then sell overseas. And it was challenging because I had to learn a new industry every week, and the profit margins. And the tough thing about electronics is after a year they become outdated. So it was quite an interesting experience working there. One of my more memorable deals was buying Gillette goods, like the shaving blades, Mach 2 or Mach 3 at the time. This is in 2001. And we bought all these goods from Mumbai, India, and moved it into Rotterdam, which was sort of a neutral place you could move goods and services that had few restrictions. And then from there, moved it to Israel. And it was amazing. And in fact, little did I know, a year later, I'd be stuck in Rotterdam, and not able to go back to Vancouver to work at Jim Pattison Trade Group. That was September 11th, 2001, while I was on vacation overseas. And I could tell you the story. It's quite amazing, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
absolutely.
So I was traveling with my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, and I had worked at I guess the company for almost 9 months, and we went on vacation. We went traveled throughout Turkey and throughout Egypt, and it was the morning of September 11th, 2001. I was literally in front of the pyramids, traveling on a camel. And then we drove back to our hostel we were staying, and we went to the airport, to the Schiphol Airport, Amsterdam. We flew there. My wife had to continue, or my girlfriend at the time continued on traveling to Italy and Greece, and I had to make my way back to Vancouver to continue working. And I remember waiting in line with my boarding pass to board the flight, and all these TVs were brought out. It was CNN. And this big tower was on fire, and everyone was confused, and the loudspeaker was going off, and then I saw a plane, the second plane, hit the tower, and there was just total chaos at the airport. So we didn't get on our flight. I was stuck. It's actually not a bad place to be stuck for a couple weeks. But I was stuck in Amsterdam, and then...
What'd you do?
Well, we spent some time at the coffee shops. What can I say? And then it was overcrowded because you had thousands of people at the airport. So we got put on a bus, and I think we went to Rotterdam, where I stayed in a refugee camp. You remember the old show MASH? It was like one of those big tents, but they were very nice. So I stayed there for 2 weeks until I could get back to Vancouver. So it was interesting because I was moving all these goods and services to Rotterdam and never envisioned what that city would look like, which is a really cool city. The architecture is amazing. And a year later, I was stuck in a refugee camp. So when I came back to Vancouver finally, it was very hard to move goods across the border. There were some issues, and that's when I decided to get into the real estate business.
Were you stuck with a lot of Mach 2s when they already had moved on to Mach 3, or?
Yeah,
get caught with the Mach 2.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that's got to be the hardest stuff to keep up with, really.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a Mach 5 right now.
Is just in thinking, so a lot of people, and I think Mark, I mentioned a listener of ours who also subscribes to the Goodman Report reached out to us not long ago and said, hey, you got to get Mark on the show. Can you talk a little bit about how the report, the actual report came to be, and the role that's played in your business? Kind of asking for a friend, thinking about the podcast.
Yeah, sure. The report started, I guess my father started in the real estate business back in the 70s in Vancouver. But maybe I should rewind and go back a little bit more. He worked in Montreal in what we call the schmata business. He worked in the retail business, fine suits. And he worked at the family business called Golden Sons. It was kind of like the Harry Rosen of today, on St. Denis Street or St. Catherine Street in Montreal, and selling suits. And actually, an interesting story, they had the finest suits in Montreal, these beautiful cashmere suits. And there was a story when the mafia went and robbed a bank up the street. And while the alarm bells were going off, they came in with boatloads of money and bought 20 cashmere suits and then ran off. And I just remember hearing that story. But, things were tense in Quebec at the time in the 70s. And so my parents drove to Lotus Land, Vancouver, where he continued working in the clothing business, and then finally decided he had enough and wanted to try his luck at real estate. So he became a residential realtor in the early 70s. He worked for a company called NRS Block Brothers, which was a major national firm at the time. And in 1979, became the top salesman across Canada. So it was quite a rewarding career for him. And in the early days, he ran with this guy named Marty Mandel, who's since passed away, but he was quite the entrepreneur, developer, and they would go down to Richmond with, you can imagine, the car full of these big site plans that you would get from City Hall, showing the city streets and the sites. And they would look for homes that were improved on 2 lots, or small homes that were built on large lots where they saw either they could subdivide or build townhouses. And they assembled entire city blocks. And so they would literally get out of the car and offer the homeowner cash and buy up these homes. And so he was called the king of Richmond at the time. And then a few months later, they would demolish all the homes, and Marty would build the townhouses. And I've heard some funny stories on Sunday. The Chinese community would come out after eating dim sum. And you can imagine 20, 30, 40 buyers coming out to look at these townhouses. And he was running from across the street from home to home, opening up, because everyone had to use the washroom after eating dim sum for an hour. And it was crazy times. But yeah, he would sell a property a day. It was quite a learning experience for him, how he cut his teeth. And then he broke into Shaughnessy, which was really the old boys club. And how does a young rookie realtor break into the most prestigious neighborhood in the city, if not Western Canada? And what he did is he wrote a newsletter. He knocked on doors, he introduced himself, and he would slip newsletters through the door. It wasn't called the Goodman Report back then. It was just an information source. Back then, things were simpler. People made fun of him. He always had 20 dimes in his pocket, because that's what it cost to call in to the switchboard from a public telephone. He knew every public telephone in the city. There was no fax, there was no internet, there was no email, no pagers. There was nothing. And, you can imagine they were cutting deals on carbon paper on the back of a hood of a car. And that's how they were doing business back then. So he broke into the Shaughnessy market and continued his success writing. But he got tired of the grind. As you know, as a residential realtor, you're on 24/7, and he was working evenings and weekends, and he had a desire to get more into the business world of things. And I think one of the catalysts is he met a guy named Nelson Scalbania in 1978, the famous real estate mogul. And Nelson showed up in a fancy Rolls Royce in his late 30s or early 40s and bought cash in an apartment building. And that sort of moved my father into another direction, into the apartment world. But there was no information source back then. Remember, there was no central place to get information. So he started the Goodman Report newsletter. And back then, it was a very simple way of communicating with apartment owners and other investors. And it's evolved ever since then, and as a kid, I started in the business when I was just a kid. I was 5, 6 years old. We would sit around the dining room table and stuff the Goodman Report into envelopes, with my mother and my brother and my grandparents and the cleaning lady. My mother would make really strong coffee to keep us going, and there my father was writing little notes to all the apartment owners, and it's that philosophy that we carry on, that tradition today. I can't write handwritten notes to every apartment owner. We just simply don't have time. We've grown, but we had very humble beginnings.
Right, and the report has not only survived, but I guess flourished.
Yeah, we have. It's unruly at times. If we hit the market right, we can get 100 phone calls in an hour. We have 15,000 subscribers. It's evolved to our Facebook page. We have almost 30,000 connections on LinkedIn, and we're well read. So, as you guys know, you have a large following. It's hard to balance, actually doing sales and communicating with your stakeholders, but it's very rewarding, and we've had a really good ride over the last 18 years. And what I like about our industry, it's every day it's new, different clients, different problems, different product, and it's quite rewarding putting deals together, as you guys know. I remember my first day almost 18 years ago. I started at McDonald Realty, and my father invited me in, and he said, "Here's your office, and here's your chair, and here's your phone." And I think I just finished my pre-licensing course. I don't know how it works today, but back then you had to do a pre-licensing, and then you have a post-licensing where you have to finish it. And so I didn't even have my full license yet. Didn't know what a cap rate was. Barely knew what I was doing. I was green. And he says, "Okay, your first task is I want you to call this guy. He's a competitor of ours. His name is John G, and he works at Colliers International." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I want you to call him and ask him for an information package on this property." So my first call, I've been in the business for 3 minutes. I've been shown my office, shown my phone. I pick it up, I call, and I answer, and I say, "Hello, this is Mark Goodman calling from McDonald Commercial Real Estate Services Limited. I'm calling on behalf of David Goodman, and I'm wondering if you could send me a financial package on this such and such property." And he says to me, "Hello, Mark Goodman of McDonald Commercial Real Estate Services Limited, calling on behalf of David Goodman." He said, "There's only one problem, Mark." And I said, "Well, what's that?" He says, "You didn't ask me if I was cooperating." And I didn't know what he meant. What does he mean by cooperating? So I asked him, I said, "Well, are you cooperating?" And he said, "No," click. And he hung up on me. So that was my first 5 minutes in the industry. And it taught me a lot that, no one's going to give you anything. You got to work hard for it. And it's a very competitive market, particularly the multifamily market. It's a very small space. And for many years, it's the same characters in our space brokering deals.
And Mark, just for the listeners at home, cooperating in this situation refers to?
Yeah, so what they mean is cooperating means, are you providing a fee? Are you sharing your fee with me? So in the residential market, which primarily uses the MLS system, there is a fee of which a portion of it goes to the buyer's agent. So the buyer knows they're going to get paid a fee, whatever is published online. In the commercial sector, for the most part, the seller pays their agent the fee, and the buyer more often than not is not represented because it's a very sophisticated type of asset class. And if they need representation, they'll hire a lawyer. But for those that want to hire a realtor to represent them, they will typically pay their agent, and the seller will pay their agent. So we're both receiving our fees from our respective clients. But it means a little bit more in commercial because often, in some cases, commercial agents simply won't cooperate. Forget about fees. They just won't answer your calls. They won't give you information. They won't let you on the property. That's not our philosophy. When an agent calls me and asks if we're cooperating, I say, yes, we're very cooperative, but you'll have to collect your fee from your client.
Little different culture.
A little different.
I'm just thinking out loud here, Mark, but can you talk maybe, I'd love to hear more about the multifamily market in Vancouver, of course. But just before we get to that, in thinking of the MLS system, so there is a commercial MLS The product that you're dealing with, though, is likely not advertised on the commercial MLS system. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I would say over 80% of the trades that happen throughout Metro Vancouver are not done on the MLS system. It's just not geared toward our market. There's a few challenges with the MLS system. For example, if you list on the MLS, the bylaws require you to show the property within 1 week of an inquiry from a licensed agent. Well, we can't always do that because they're tenanted, and there's a lot of logistics getting permission and written permission and giving notice, and it's quite disruptive. So typically my job is to qualify the buyer, and only then, if we feel that it's a fit, will we take that next step and show the property. So that's number one. The bylaws simply don't work for our industry. And number two, you need to have a price published on the MLS system. And often with our market, we don't have a firm price. Sometimes it's an open bid, unpriced system of selling real estate. It depends on the timing and the type of asset that you're selling. And I was a director of the real estate board for a couple of years, and we helped develop a new system where you could share and cooperate with your fellow colleagues in the real estate industry, but that was not on the MLS system. And so that was the commercial broadcast system, which I helped develop, which there's thousands of subscribers who are residential realtors and commercial realtors that want access to the marketplace, who have clients that they work with and have agency agreements with their clients, their buyers. And so, and now there's a new system called, I think it's called Commercial First at the real estate board as well, which is sort of a parallel system to the MLS system, which allows agents to create their own marketing packages and not use the preset fields that the MLS system uses. So it's just a different way of doing business. And as time has gone on over the last 18 years, the MLS system has become less prominent in the commercial real estate world because of the new systems that are in place now.
So how does like a Nelson Scalbania coming to Vancouver, how does he even get started?
Called Mark.
Well, I mean,
calling an agent, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get started in the real estate business, sometimes a lot of investors that we meet have inherited their family's portfolio. Maybe they started with a 4-plex or a 6-plex, and over time they've reinvested or they've refinanced and moved into larger properties. Other times they can be professionals, doctors, dentists, lawyers, accountants who want passive income, something that they can put away, and often they'll hire a professional property manager to take care of it because they have busy lives. They're professionals. Others are entrepreneurs, younger groups that have trades. I mean, you have to wear many hats in the multifamily business because the average age is 50, 60 years old. These buildings need constant work. Repairs and maintenance are an issue. So I see a lot of the entrepreneurs coming in have some background in trade and construction to keep up with these aging buildings.
Right. Maybe kind of shifting gears a little bit. You already mentioned it's a small marketplace, but can you speak a little bit more about the multifamily market here in Vancouver?
Yeah, absolutely. What I could do is perhaps share my screen with you now, and I have a few charts that I think would illustrate high level our market. So let me give this a go and see if this works.
And for the listeners on the podcast, we'll try and be very clear about what we're looking at here. But of course, this is available on our YouTube channel, Vancouver Real Estate Podcast, as well,
and over at our website, right? Vancouver Real Estate Podcast.
Yeah. So these are just some Metro Vancouver multifamily facts, just to start at a higher level and explain to people how big our market is. We're actually quite a small market compared to other cities in Canada. There are only 3,300 purpose-built rental apartment buildings. So the majority, 90%, are those 3-story walk-up wood frame buildings that average 60 years in age. And of those 3,300 Now, and 10% are concrete high rises, and then there's some strata titled buildings thrown in there, owned by one owner. And of those 3,300 buildings, roughly 2,200 of people own those 3,300 buildings. So some companies like Hollyburn, for example, own 50 or 60 buildings in the city of Vancouver. So, and then some are just mom and pops that came here from Europe in the 60s and built the building, and it's been their nest egg ever since. So there's really only 2,200 purpose-built rental apartment building owners in all of Metro Vancouver, and that's from Vancouver, Burnaby, New Westminster, Coquitlam, and other Tri-City areas. So, and in terms of cap rate yield, this is the return on investment. In early 2018, right up to say early 2019, we saw cap rates hovering in the low 2% range for wood frame buildings, and it's moved up toward 3% in the last 6 months, and that's due to a lot of changes within the government and them trying to, cool down the market with a lot of demand side measures, tax initiatives that the NDP government's put through. But the average cap rate in 2019 was 3.12, so it's actually gone up. The average vacancy rate was 1.1% in 2019. Volume had dropped substantially in 2019 compared to a year earlier. There was only $1.1 billion in sales. There were only 77 transactions completed last year, and I think that was down like 60% from the year earlier. And so those are the high level numbers that people who aren't familiar with the multifamily market should know. And yeah.
So Mark, a few things about that. One is that as listeners of the show or people that follow the residential market know, in 2018 it was kind of a lot of the policy measures you're talking about, but then the stress test came in 2018. We saw a real cool down in the last half of that year through 2019 as well, and then it started picking up, and then now we're at the kind of COVID freeze, I guess.
Yeah.
But in the multifamily or purpose-built rental market, are you seeing kind of the same trajectory? Does it follow residential? And it seems like there's better value now, as I understand, than there was, say, a year or two ago.
Yeah. Well, you are right. I mean, there are some parallels between the residential market and the commercial multifamily market, but they're not always in tandem. But generally speaking, when the residential market's hot, and a lot of time it's fueled by cheap money, and of course a lot of people moving to BC and Vancouver every year, yes, often we do fall we do have a parallel between us. But there's also many different things at stake in the multifamily market, which particularly affected us over the last year and a half. And I actually have some notes here because there's been so many government initiatives and new taxes that it's hard to actually keep up. So I'm going to read a few of the things that have happened. So in 2018 and 2019, we saw rent increases capped at inflation. There's tougher rules for tenant relocation, threats of vacancy control, end to fixed term tenancies, and geographic rent increases. And then on the demand side, government interventions, we saw an increase in property tax to 5% for properties over $3 million. Foreign buyers tax was raised to 20%. We have rental only zoning used to downzone properties in some municipalities. And we've had the addition of the school and speculation tax to development land. So all of this combined together really affected the market, affected the residential, the multifamily market in particular. We have an affordability problem in the city. It's a very politically charged environment. And it's sad that, in my opinion, all these government initiatives to I guess, make housing more affordable has actually done the opposite, because what it's done is it's discouraged developers from building rentals. It's just a nightmare to try to develop purpose-built rental stock for a variety of reasons. And year over year, vacancy rates continue to go down, and rental rates continue to go up. These policies that they put in place really frustrate the free market, allowing for the rejuvenation of older buildings, allowing for new supply to come on stream. And these buildings are 60 years old. A lot of them are falling apart, and it's a challenge. So we have a demand-supply imbalance that's not going anywhere. And so that's why, in a way, the multifamily market, in my opinion, will continue to go up in value for years to come, because there's just simply not enough supply to house all these people moving here. So as a result, rental rates will continue to go up. What I have here for your audience is, I'll show you a couple charts. You can see here's a 10-year snapshot of Metro Vancouver's rental apartment market starting in 2010. So in 2010, for example, we had 90 trades, $432 million in volume. And then we could fast forward to, say, 2014, the market really picked up. We had that year, $778 million in sales, 123 transactions. And then 2015, 2016, things really started to move. And then in 2017, it was a big year, almost $2.2 billion in sales, 150 transactions. And then in 2018, things just exploded, almost $3 billion in sales, 155 transactions. So that was 2018. Then the NDP government came into power, put all these ineffective policies in place, and the market dropped like a tank. It just dropped. $1.1 billion in volume, 77 sales. So the market came off 50 to 60% on transaction and dollar volume, but it hasn't made our city more affordable. In fact, it's made everything more expensive because there's nowhere to live. There's no incentive for developers to build buildings. So it's been a challenge. And now with COVID-19, we have some other challenges to transact properties. But believe it or not, we've actually been very busy during this time. We've put 3 buildings under contract, 1 apartment building and 2 development sites. We've had 1 closing. We have another closing coming up, and we're listing a 1.6 acre industrial site in a couple weeks. So it's harder to show buildings because we can't get into the tenanted suites, but we're just delaying our due diligence periods and allowing for the moment physical distancing is relaxed. Hopefully we'll be able to move forward again. But the demand is still there in our market. It truly is. And we're busy despite this.
Well, so I'm kind of curious, looking back at 2010 or even up till now, or even from, say, when you started, you've been in the business 18 years. A lot of people listening are probably thinking about, who's the person who buys beach towers, right? You guys you sold beach towers, right? Not all that long ago, but not necessarily specifically beach towers, but where are the buyers of purpose-built rental coming from? Are they primarily local? Are they primarily from other places in Canada? Are they individuals? Are they companies? Can you speak about the buyers? And then I think some of our listeners would really be interested in kind of an investment analysis, how value is established, the kind of for dummies version of how purpose-built rental value is established.
Sure. Now I'm trying to let me unshare for a moment and get back, and then I can go back and answer your second part of the question. So you talked about who would buy beach towers. So we sold beach towers back in Q1 2019. We were unable to announce the sale until the restrictions had been lifted a year later. But originally we were bringing offers to the ownership group that were off market, and at that time they were entertaining offers, but for various reasons decided not to engage or sell those offers that we brought, and then they invited us to actually assist them in brokering a deal between the partners. So ultimately, one of the ownership groups bought out the balance of the ownership groups to take control, 100% control. So that's how the deal ended up happening. It was a share purchase. The buildings originally were built by Arthur Block of Block Brothers, and one of the Morris Wask bought the property many years ago, and then they bought the land. It was leased land, and I think back then it was I think the entire property was purchased for $30 million, which was about $50,000 a door, and then it sold for the 100% equivalent of $305 million. Yeah.
Not a bad return. Are most of the people bringing offers on you guys' properties, are they primarily from Canada or
Yeah, they're mostly local. I mean, even before the foreign buyers tax was introduced, there weren't a lot of offshore buyers or foreign buyers. I know it was big news in the media that foreigners are buying up real estate and making it unaffordable for Vancouverites. And while that may be true, in the multifamily market, there were very few offshore buyers. And we did a survey. We went back to, I think, our last 200 transactions. There were only 2 foreign buyers. One was an Austrian guy, a hedge fund manager who bought a property from us, and another person from Shanghai. Out of 200 properties, those were the only 2 foreigners. So I think a lot of offshore money was coming into the land and the development site scene, but not so much in the multifamily scene. And now with the foreign buyers tax, it's all local and, Canadian for the most part. So there are local buyers, there's family-based operators, there's mom and pop, there's professionals like dentists and lawyers who buy property to balance their portfolio. And there's a lot of institutional pension funds and REITs, particularly out of Toronto. I was in Toronto showcasing some newer listings. I flew there. Cynthia and I went, and we met with 6 or 7 of the major guys out of Toronto and met them at their office. And actually, COVID had just started. So, I mean, we were still social distancing. It was kind of a weird, like we were in no man's land. We weren't quite sure. You know, some people were still shaking hands. Others, we were keeping our distance because Toronto was a couple weeks ahead of us. And anyway, the demand for multifamily is huge, and a lot of the Eastern-based companies really want to continue either make their first venture into BC or continue growing their portfolio. And we're seen as a very attractive place to put money. You asked me a second question about sort of like what are the
establishing value. Yeah.
So
you've talked a little bit about you've talked a little bit about it, but if you could expand, I think.
Sure. I'll share my screen again with you here. And so can you see this okay, this chart?
Yeah.
So this is a chart that we publish, and it starts back in 2008 and it goes right to 2019, and it shows what we call cap rate or capitalization rate, which is really the return or the yield that an investor can expect buying a building. And it's really it's a simple methodology. You take the gross revenue, which would be your rental income and perhaps some laundry income and parking income, and minus the expenses that you need to operate a building. So tax, insurance, utilities. You'll have a repairs and maintenance budget. You'll put in a nominal vacancy rate of, say, 0.5% in the city of Vancouver. And at the end, you're left with your profit, your net operating income. And it's that number divided into the ask price or the sale price, which gives you your return, your yield. And this number is before debt service, so it doesn't include mortgage payments or depreciation or anything like that. And historically, like when I joined the business 18 years ago, cap rates were 6 to 6.5 in the city of Vancouver. Prime Westside real estate was selling at $80,000 a door. Expense ratio was about 33% of gross revenue. And obviously that's changed now, where in 2018, for example, 2017, 2018, the market was hot. I mean, we were selling prime West Side wood frame apartment buildings for anywhere from $550 up to $700,000 a unit in some cases. And you know, that was for average condition buildings right up to totally renovated buildings. And the cap rates hovered. You know, we were doing deals even at 1.8, 1.9% cap, but generally speaking, most of these wood frame buildings were trading in the low 2 cap rate range. And it begged the question, like, why would people put 50, 60% down to buy an apartment building, because that's what it takes, to receive such a low yield? And a lot of these investors, you know, have different criteria. A lot of it's just safety and appreciation and to diversify their portfolio. But there are a lot of entrepreneurs that knew that they needed to rejuvenate these buildings, 50, 60-year-old buildings with chronic plumbing issues and water ingress issues and environmental problems. And, you know, they have green stoves and yellow tubs and appliances that don't function. And so many of these investors were renovating the suites. And so that cap rate, that 2.2, 2.3% yield could literally, within a few months, double. And so in some cases, a lot of these legacy tenants who were in the building, or when a tenant would move out, if they were paying $700 or $800 a month, on turnover with, say, a $30,000 renovation to the suite, you could get $2,200 a month. So we're talking over 100% jump in rental income. And so that's why during this time, a lot of these buildings were trading at such a low yield. And now that's more challenging because the provincial government has put in place many restrictions that have stopped this renovation program for buildings, and which resulted in evictions, of course. And so now we have rental stock that is having a hard time being rejuvenated, and which causes its own problems. Now, on the same token, we're having a renaissance in Metro Vancouver with new purpose-built buildings. So finally, the sun, the moon, the stars have all aligned to make an environment almost beneficial to the production of new rental housing. And it's taken a long time in advocacy to get to this point. We still have a lot of challenges with, you know, long periods of time for rezoning and just the process to go through with the city to get your development permit. It can be quite laborious. But those buildings that are brand new that we're selling are either as a forward sale, like a pre-construction offering, so we're selling the property before it's even built, or new purpose-built product that has been built, typically are trading at a much higher cap rate. And for a lot of people, that's counterintuitive. They say, well, why are we needing to have such a high yield for a new building? Shouldn't it be a lower yield because it's lower risk, it's new, there's less problems? But the reality is that those buildings are rented at market. There's no upward movement to increase your revenue over time, at least not in the immediate future. So that lift has already been built into the offering. So if an old wood frame building was trading at, say, $300,000 a unit at a 2.2 yield, a brand new building with all the fancy amenities and dishwasher and in-suite laundry, those rents would be trading at closer to $4 a square foot. They would be, in many cases, double what an old rental building would be. And in return, the investor's paying $600,000 a unit or $550,000 a unit. But in return, we'll expect and require a much higher yield. And so it's almost like we have two different asset classes. We have the 56-year-old aged buildings, which are inefficient, that require a lot of attention and upgrades. And then we have this new purpose-built phenomenon as well happening. And unfortunately, it's not happening fast enough. And so for the foreseeable future, apartment buildings are going to continue to be a very safe asset class to invest in, because there's virtually not enough supply, and everybody needs a place to live. And until people stop moving to Vancouver and wanting to do business here and live here, I think we're going to be safe for a long time to come.
Mark, maybe thinking about that, like right now, so in thinking of the multifamily market in Vancouver, is it unique to the rest of Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I think in Montreal they have 10 times, or in Toronto they have 10 times the product. Every province has different rules and regulations with respect to their tenancy acts. But I think what makes us unique is it's generally a smaller market, and it's a highly politicized asset class. And the land use policies that we have in place, in many cases, discourage redevelopment. And I can't speak to other cities and other provinces because I don't trade in those markets. But one of the things that makes Vancouver unique is we have effectively what's called it's a moratorium on the demolition of apartment buildings, and it started in the West End, I think 15 years ago or so, as a way to retain purpose-built rental stock so it wasn't demolished for condos. I mean, the intentions were good. And then about 10 years ago, they implemented it in Vancouver, and it was supposed to be a 2-year pilot project. But of course, it stayed. And what that means is we have a lot of RM zone land throughout Vancouver, in Fairview, South Granville neighborhoods, in Kitsilano, Marpole, and so forth. And those rental buildings are all built in what we call RM zone land, residential multifamily land. So the city has basically said that you can't demolish these apartment buildings at all. It's just a freeze. And so unfortunately, that prohibits the rejuvenation of these buildings and building bigger buildings and building newer supply. And so there's this tug of war between wanting to make sure that Vancouverites aren't displaced. And you can imagine a lot of them have been living in relatively affordable housing compared to the market today. And if they were evicted because of a demolition and a rebuild, many of them would have a hard time finding a place to live in their same neighborhood. And so that's the inherent challenge. So the city has frozen that rental stock, but there's been a ton of side effects. And one of them is it's restricted supply. And so yes, they're saving a few people and keeping their rents affordable, but in return, it's making it unaffordable for everybody else because something's got to give, and there's just not enough places to live. Nobody can demolish these buildings. So, the city has started various programs, Rental 100, the MERT program, where you can redevelop purpose-built rental buildings in areas outside the RM zone. For example, on arterial routes or single-family zoning, they have new initiatives in place to build 4 to 6 story rental buildings. But, it's a complicated process, and it takes time. So our city is struggling, and I think that's what makes us unique, is that we have a philosophy at City Hall that focuses, and our province, that focuses on measures to create affordability on the demand side of the equation. And I think that this has caused more problems and made our city more unaffordable. I think what the city should do is create incentives to build rental housing and allow the free market to build, allow developers to compete and landlords to compete against each other. And I mean, look at what happened in Seattle. It's just amazing. They've cut the red tape. They don't micromanage developers to build. And they've expedited the whole process. And as a result, very soon after, rental rates started to come down and vacancy rates started to come up, and they have a healthy market. But unfortunately, our city politicians, it's very politically expedient to wave the flag and say we're protecting you renters and we're doing everything in your best interest. But the problem is it's causing the side effect is much worse. And as you can see, I have a chart in front of you. Case in point, 2010, the average monthly rental rate was $995, and we had a 1.9% vacancy rate. Well, go to 2015, the vacancy rate dropped to 0.8, and rents jumped to over $1,100. And now in 2019, rents are almost at $1,500 per month, and vacancy rates are still hovering around 1%. So despite all these initiatives that the city claims to be putting forward to help renters and help create affordability, has done the absolute opposite. And that's really what the Goodman Report, why we're here, is we're reporting on this, and we focus on the numbers. We're very data driven. And so we track every single sale in Metro Vancouver. We track rental rates, cap rates, dollar volume. And we've been critical of the policies that have been put forth. And we hope that after this COVID era, we get back to a normal working environment, that the city will change course and start creating incentives and creating an environment for developers to build rental properties faster. And I think that's the key.
And for those people who are not looking at the chart, 1.9% vacancy in 2010 was the highest vacancy that Vancouver has had since, right? Like, it's been lower since 2010 across the board. It was 1.9% was the highest. And that actually makes me think, we had Klaus Rode, who's a property manager we work with, and he helps people that are renting out strata properties. You're on the multifamily side of things. We asked Klaus what he was seeing in relation to COVID so far. I'm curious, Mark, just in your kind of day-to-day going on right now, what the impact of COVID has been on, not only on how you're selling properties, but more on the market. And it sounds like you're saying there's still a lot of confidence, but has COVID impacted the ability to collect the rents, and what are you seeing on the ground there?
Yeah, good question. And it's changing daily. I think we've been in this environment for about 6 weeks now, it feels like, give or take. And I would say that overall in this 6-week period, certainly it's been a lot more challenging as a broker to function, but we've adapted very quickly. We're all set up on Zoom and Skype. I didn't really use any of those programs before. We're fully digital with Authentisign, dealing with offers. Our marketing department we're working remotely with. And so as a real estate company, we're functioning. I would say that the hardest part for us being in the rental housing business and selling rental housing is that we cannot enter into suites right now. So we are doing transactions. The ones that, like for example, we put an apartment building under contract with a public company 3 weeks ago when COVID was quite prevalent, and they're doing their due diligence, but we've extended the timeline for building inspection for a couple months to allow time, and hopefully we'll be able to enter suites at that time. So it's not that there's a lack of demand, it's just the mechanics of selling a property are much more difficult now for apartment buildings. However, we just sold we put under contract a strata building in Kerrisdale, a small building. We were able to show those suites because they're owner occupied. So the way we did it was we had face masks and gloves that we were wearing, and we had 8 groups. It was not an open house. It was an organized time slot, and we had the doors open. The owner stepped out. They weren't allowed to touch anything. They had to wear face masks and gloves, one group at a time. And when they left, I had information packages lying on the front lawn that they could pick up. And that's how we did it. And it worked out. And everybody was very respectful. everybody's a lot more patient, I find, sellers and buyers, generally speaking, because everybody's in the same boat. And so now we have it under contract and it's just subject to financing. The appraiser called me. He can't get into the building, so I sent him pictures that I had taken because I went through the building pre-COVID. So yeah, we're doing deals. I mean, I could show you a few of the transactions that we're doing or have done during the COVID period. So for example, I'll showcase this property, that Polygon Homes. They're one of the larger, I think the largest home builder in Western Canada. And this is a 75 suite purpose-built rental building, just finishing construction in Lynn Valley. We're asking $50 million. We've had a great response despite COVID. We were touring the building pre-COVID with a hard hat tour. So we're dealing with multiple offers right now on the property. And we expect the occupancy permit to come in May 2020. There's a mix of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. Almost 63,000 net rentable square feet, 5 and 6 story property. And you can expect around a 4% cap rate for this property. So beautiful. Yeah.
So you said multiple offers on this property.
That's right.
And when did you guys bring it to market?
We brought it to market, I would say, about 2 months ago, probably about 2 weeks before COVID hit. And we actually flew to Toronto to introduce this property to a number of the major pension funds and REITs, and they're all excited about it. So, just the due diligence process now is just going to take longer, and that's the reality. But the demand is still there. The banks are still functioning. The land title office is still functioning. So all the elements, like the supply-demand imbalance that we have in rental housing, is so pronounced that I just see this as a really bad snowstorm right now that's going to pass, because all the fundamentals are there for a healthy real estate sector. And I know there's a lot of people hoping that things will crash and that affordability will come back. But I truly believe that we are going to come back very healthy from this. And that's just from my own listings. Like, here's another property that we put under contract 3 weeks ago during COVID. This is a public company that's tied it up. This was an interesting deal. This was unpriced property, and this goes to your question about how we value buildings. And I think this is a really good example. So normally when we value buildings, we look at what the yield cap rate should be and what the using the income approach versus the direct comparable approach, where we look at the price per unit. And not all units are the same. You have some buildings may have a high percentage of bachelor units, which are typically smaller. Another building will have a high percentage of 2 bedrooms, which are typically larger. So the price per unit, it's a very general guide. There are appraisal techniques where we use what's called room weight, where we adjust the units per room so we can compare apples to apples. But generally speaking, we use price per unit. For larger concrete towers, we try to use price per square foot, which is a more exact way of valuing. And we also use the gross rent multiplier, GRM, which is how many multiples of the annual gross rent divided into the ask price. And so that is a way of valuing properties, but not looking at the expenses. The cap rate takes into account the expenses. So looking at this building, large, almost 29,000 square foot property just off Main, a block on East 14th, amazing rental location, big building, 54 units, built in 66. And the rents, though, are averaging around $700 a month, which is, 125, 150% below market. And so how do I value the building? If I used a cap rate, a yield, and say capped it at a 3% cap, which is generally where wood frame, older Westside and Eastside buildings are trading at, the price per unit would be ridiculous. It would be like under $200,000 a door. Well, we know that in generally this hot location in Mount Pleasant, buildings have generally been trading at around $350,000 a door. But if I price it at $350,000 a door, the cap rate would be like 1%. It doesn't work. So I can't use the income approach because the property would be valued too low. And I can't use the comparable approach because it'll just be too high and the yield will be too low. So how do you price it? And I told my client, I said, I don't know. I just simply don't know how to price it. Let's go it unpriced and let's see what happens. And that's exactly what we did. And we've got it under contract now. So that's just an example of how the income approach using cap rate and the direct comparable approach don't always jive. And you'll notice when you're looking on an appraisal, a commercial appraisal, they may look at the cost approach. They may give you a residual for development, and then they'll look at the direct comparison approach or cap rate or a comparable approach. And generally speaking, those different prices will come in around the same range. They'll come in at a tight range. But you have a problem as a broker or an appraiser when you're trying to price properties when there's like a $6 million swing between the two approaches that you use. It's a problem. Right. And it's a problem in Vancouver because there's a lot of buildings that are not efficient and they're operating at rental rates from 25 years ago. What else can I show you here? So here's a small little building we have in North Van, Lower Lonsdale. We've gone firm on this. Closing is expected in a month. This was a 10-suiter in decent shape, mom and pop owners, very well maintained, built in 1956. We had it listed at a 3.2 cap rate, around $385,000 a door. The average rental rate is $2.15. The lot, 50 by 140, so it's a 7,000 square foot lot. And it also falls under the North Van OCP, the official community plan that allows for a higher density if you build rental. That's their way of encouraging you to build rental. So it's a 1.6 FSR, which is floor space ratio. You can build 1.6 times the lot size. But if you build residential, they'll give you an extra 1 FSR. So in theory, you could build 2.6 times the lot size, but you would need to assemble the neighbors in order to make it economically feasible to build. But that's a benefit for the buyer. They have that. And you're literally a few minutes from the quay and the C bus station. It's a really nice property. So that again has happened during our COVID experience. I can show you some sales. Here's a property that we just sold a couple weeks ago, and it's a concrete tower, 21 stories at 1230 Nelson in the West End, right by Nelson Park, 107 units.
People will be familiar with this building.
What's that?
Most people will be familiar with this building.
Yeah, it's a magnificent building. It actually has a twin building next door, and they share an underground parkade. So this property sold for $52 million, around $486,000 a unit. It was purchased by a local family-based operator. And this was a bit of a scary experience because we'd gone firm on the deal a month earlier, pre-COVID. And then this all happened. And then on closing day is when they actually shut down the city. Like that's when all the enforcement came in, and we didn't know if the land title office would be open to do this. We had no idea. So I remember calling the lawyer and I said, so are we going to be able to do this deal today? And he said, I hope so. But fortunately, everything is done electronically. The land title office is open. The lawyers were available to do the deal, and it closed. But that closed during this period of time, and we were able to do the deal. So the majority of our business years ago was apartment buildings, but now we're very much involved in development sites, and I'd say it represents about 50% of our business. So 2 days ago, we put under contract a 6-story rental site on Main and 33rd. So I'll just pull this up here. This prime corner. The site is owned by an individual who assembled 5 lots. The city of Vancouver is offering incentives, and so the program that the plans have been or this development falls under is called the Affordable Houses Choices Program. And essentially what the city was doing is encouraging rental development on arterial routes on single-family zone neighborhoods to build 6 stories. So that program is now over, but it's been grandfathered for the site. So we had multiple competing offers from the big developers. They're all the brand name guys we all know. So it's under contract now for a few months. And so the plans have been submitted to the city, and the architect has submitted the plans. And so what's planned is a 65-unit residential property with 4 commercial units. The floor space ratio would be 3.3 FSR. And so that works out to approximately 61,000 square feet of buildable over 6 stories. So again, I know a lot of people think it's the end of the world and our economy is being devastated, but the reality is there is a lot of money out there looking for a home. In some cases, it's very wealthy people that have cashed out of the stock market and just want a flight to safety. In other reasons, I mean, interest rates are historically low, and there are a lot of opportunities to leverage. So land is very hot right now. And here's another site that we have. This is a C2 zone site, 2600 block Nanaimo and 10th, or Nanaimo and 11th. And a few years ago, the city rezoned this whole area from single family to C2, which allows you a 2.5 floor space ratio. We're asking $15 million, which works out to $219 a foot buildable, which works out to, I mean, you could build just over 68,000 square feet, condo building with some commercial on the ground floor. So we've got multiple offers going right now on that property. And so look, it's taking a little longer to do deals just because we're not moving at the same pace, but I have found certainly an uptick in interest over the last few weeks. And I expect that as soon as this COVID mess is over, that we'll be back to business very quickly. So we're certainly very optimistic.
Well, there's a lot of interesting deals there. One thing that strikes me is, and I'm sure a lot of people that are, either looking to acquire a door or have a couple doors are going to look at something like that building in the West End on Nelson.
House
said $486,000 a door it worked out to. That seems, I don't know if it seems high to you guys. That seems high considering you could probably buy an average sized unit in there in a strata for, call it $550 or something like that, right? Like, it's amazing that the price per door when you're buying 100 together is not all that much lower than if you're buying a single.
Actually, you make a really good point because, if this was a couple of years ago, I would suggest that the price per unit could have been $500,000 a door, or $525,000 a door, and the reason why is because rental rates have increased significantly over the last few years. There's so much pressure because remember, investors are income driven, they're yield driven, so they know that over time they can take that low 2.5 cap rate and bring it up to 3 or 4% just on natural turnover. And so that's what's fueling the market. The decision process when you're buying a condo often is, for an owner occupier. But, traditionally the delta in pricing between a strata titled property and a rental property was quite large. Rental properties per square foot typically sold, 25, 30, 35% less than the equivalent product that was strata titled. But that gap is shrinking, and in some cases, not now, but perhaps a year and a half ago, in some cases, the rental properties were selling per square foot higher than a comparable condo property. And it's just a function of interest rates and the demand for rental housing. But concrete is very rare in our city, and it's highly sought after. There's certainly some repairs and maintenance that need to be done in this building, but buyers typically pay a premium for concrete over wood frame.
Well, Adam, what do you think? Should we do the 5-wire?
Yeah, maybe we'll leave it there. But yeah, Mark, do you have time for the 5-wire? 5 lighthearted questions.
Sure.
Vancouver and yourself. So question number 1 is, what is your favorite neighborhood in Vancouver?
I'm partial to the Fairview, South Granville neighborhood. I lived there for many years. I was a renter there, and I just love the neighborhood. And I'm also partial to Douglas Park neighborhood where I live. There's a lot of good energy, a lot of nice shops, and great community. So, yeah.
Right on. Favorite bar or restaurant, Mark?
I was a frequent visitor to West on South Granville. My wife and I loved the bartender there, so we'd go to sit actually at the bar, and he'd make us fancy drinks. Unfortunately, West closed even before COVID, but I have a feeling I know where the bartender's gone, so I'll be following him. I really like West, but I found a new haunt now called Published on Main, which has these really cool appies and good environment. And the moment we can get back to eating, I'm going to hit up Published and my usual spot at Earl's and Cactus Club here near my office in South Granville.
What is one book that you would recommend our listeners read?
I recently read a book called Rise Up and Kill First. And it's an amazing book written by Ronan Bergman. And really, it's the history of the foundation of the State of Israel, starting as early as the early 1900s, right up to our modern time. And it's the history seen through the lens of the Israeli Secret Service, the Mossad. And it asks this question. It doesn't answer the question for you, but it asks the question, is it morally right to Israel's execution policy, to kill the bad guys, the terrorists, the enemy? Or would it be better to have conventional wars where you risk thousands of troops and bombs and people being killed on both sides, innocent people being killed on both sides? Or do you break the law and take out the bad guy, cut the head off the snake? And there was pros and cons to this story over the years. But what was amazing are the techniques that the Israelis had to use to defeat the enemy, who were much more powerful than they were. Very much David and the Goliath story. And those movies we see today, those movies, whether it's Bourne Identity or James Bond, and all these crazy psychological techniques or tools that they use in tradecraft, were invented by the Mossad over the years. And I must admit that I got a few ideas for my own business to take up the competition. So for any of you young brokers out there, if you want to learn some interesting techniques and tactics for defeating the enemy, read Rise and Kill First. I highly recommend it.
That's a unique one.
Oh, but you know what? To balance that, I think everybody needs a little Eckhart Tolle in their life. He's this self-actualized guy. He's like Buddha, like the Dalai Lama, and he talks about living in the present and living in the now. And I have to admit that at times the real estate business can get a little frustrating and a little stressful, and I find that it kind of balances you out. So I would certainly recommend for people who want a little peace in their life, check him out. It's a way to balance the first book. Maybe read both at the same time.
You got to watch your breath in between kills.
That's right.
Actually, we got 2 more questions for you. One piece of advice that you would give your 18-year-old self.
Probably to stay away from smoking cigarettes. That was just awful. And it's less prevalent today, but I would say, yeah, stay away from smoking. I struggled with it through high school and university, and I'm glad I kicked the habit. I'm healthy, but if I could go back in time, it would probably be that.
Good piece of advice. And last, something you have purchased for under $1,000 that has changed your life, or slightly improved it.
I don't know. I don't think I've purchased anything. I'd have to get back to you on that one. I'll tell you what's changed my life though is the Skip the Dishes app, and Uber Eats, and the other one. There's one more. I don't think I'd ever need to cook again. I mean, they know me by name now at Earl's. It's amazing. So there's a good life hack for you.
Hey, one thing, I was just thinking when we started the show as a final question, I don't know, you might not want to say anything, but and naming names, that type of thing, but it's a really small market that you work in, really big numbers. You must meet some really big personalities. Is there any one story you can think of, either a crazy purchase and sale, or one personality that stands out in the multifamily market that you can actually name, or not name, tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories during my 18 years and even before, but I would say that, I grew up in a real estate household. My aunt was very involved in real estate, and of course my father. But I remember some stories, and for example, Nelson Scalbania, the mogul, and I actually worked for him at the Wedgwood Hotel when I was younger, and there's some crazy stories there as a valet. But he was quite the entrepreneur and exceptionally smart. And I remember he would come over to the house. We were family friends, and my mother only allowed one person to smoke cigars in the house with my father, and that was with Nelson. And I remember he called once. He says, "You need to have a babysitter overnight," and he'd show up in his Rolls Royce limo, and my parents didn't know where they were going. They flew to New York for dinner because that's where the good restaurant was. And he would buy expensive jewelry, and it was just larger than life personality. And there were stories that I would hear around the kitchen table where, he would do a deal literally on a napkin, a purchase and sale agreement. I promised to buy this for this amount, and here's my deposit check. And it was on a napkin. And then he would hop in a cab, he would go 5 blocks, and he'd flip the deal for $1 million. This is back in the 80s. I mean, just insane. There was no agency. Who are you representing? It doesn't matter. There's no FinTrack. It was the Wild West. You could do whatever you wanted. But
we call it shadow flipping now.
Yeah, he didn't do it in the shadows.
He sold the napkin.
That's right. It's funny. When I was 18, I worked at the Wedgwood Hotel, which was run by Eleni Scalbania, and I was a valet. And the Bacchus restaurant, which is still there, an amazing restaurant, and my cousin used to work there, and I had the best job. I'd stand there, and the Ferraris would come, and Rolls Royces, and Nelson would come in, and he'd hold court with my father. And I remember he walked in, he threw $20. He said, "Here, kid, here's the easiest money you'll ever make." And then on the way back, I remember getting in trouble from Eleni because my shoes weren't shined properly. I learned a lot. They really came down hard on me because I didn't properly shine my shoes. But I remember one time I was standing, parking cars, and this guy pulls up. He parks his car right on Hornby, and he throws me the keys. He says, "Here, kid, take my Ferrari for a spin. It's a lease. So go for it." So, here I am. I'm 18 years old. I could barely drive stick shift. There's a Ferrari idling on Hornby. So I hopped in the car, and we were ripping up and down Georgia Street with the cute girl, the reception. Boy, was I a hero. And those were crazy times, where all the major real estate guys would hold court at the Bacchus restaurant and do big deals. So there's lots of crazy stories. I had I'll tell you one scary closing that I had. I sold a building years ago in the West End, and I remember the buyer called me and he said, "We're going to have problems with closing. Check the news." And I said, "Oh, geez." So I Googled the address, and on Global TV or CTV, there is my building that is set to close in just a few days. And it was during the fireworks in the summer overlooking English Bay. And few kids climbed up the emergency escape ladder. So these old buildings didn't have two sets of stairwells. They had one stairwell and the emergency escape ladder. And they climbed up on the ladder, hauled up a bunch of chairs and booze, and we're going to have a party on the roof and watch the fireworks. No big deal. Except one kid decided it would be fun to bounce up and down. I guess it was a rooftop glass bubble over an old elevator shaft, for lack of better words. What do you call it on the roof? It was like a glass bubble, and the kid was standing on it and broke through and dropped 5 or 6 stories. Fortunately, had landed on one of those blue recycling bins that broke his fall. So the kid broke his leg. He didn't die. And I remember the caretaker had to roll the recycling blue bin from outside to inside in the shaft. That's where they kept it. So anyways, poor kid broke his leg. And so the lender decided that he wasn't going to lend the buyer until an engineer went up on the roof to solve the problem so that wouldn't happen again. And so you never know what's going to happen. Just because a deal's firm, you never know it's going to close until it closes.
Right on. Well, maybe we'll leave it there, Mark, but two things. One is how can people find out more and get on your email list, the Goodman Report? And you mentioned something about hiring before. Is that right?
Yeah, so we're busy and we need to keep up. So as soon as COVID is over, if anybody wants to work in a crazy, fast-paced business with lunatic A-type realtors, give us a call. You can email me through our website, goodmanreport.com. Again, www.goodmanreport.com. You can go to our contact section and subscribe to our newsletter. And we publish something every couple of weeks. Don't worry, we won't spam you. You can unsubscribe at any time. And that's probably the best way to stay in touch.
And we, Matt and I have been on that mailing list for a long time and can't say enough good things about it. So thank you for it's been great to connect and to get you on the program, Mark. And thanks a lot for your time. We know you're a busy guy.
And how could people subscribe to your podcast, more importantly?
Matt, yeah, it's VancouverRealEstatePodcast.com, but we'll only plug that 6 or 7 more times on the outro.
Okay, just making sure.
All right, sounds good. Well,
good to talk, guys. Be well, stay safe, and let's keep doing deals.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Mark.
Thank you.